I think in one sense, the human brain is kind of designed to deal with uncertainty. So, we can plan out various scenarios and prepare to cope with all different potential events. But at the same time, when we're living in prolonged states of uncertainty, what ends up happening is we don't know where to put our resources. We're sort of preparing all the time to deal with a lot of different potential scenarios, and we're exerting efforts to deal with different outcomes. So I think we're both, our strength is our weakness. We're designed to deal with uncertainty, and then that same strength that we have, I think, really poses challenges in these circumstances that we're in right now.
So I'm guessing that there's all sorts of factors in here that are going to be affecting our mental well-being. So one would be that it's obviously a new disease, and it is still a bit of an unknown in terms of how it actually presents itself. So what symptoms you might get, and so you then end up with this anxiety around is my cough continuous, or have I just got a cold? Am I just feeling a bit tired, or is this fatigue? Do you know what I mean? Like the kind of the fear of the unknown and the fear of the disease itself is also bad.
Can I just
yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
These are people who are really ill, and we collectively really, really want them to survive. And it's difficult because these people are on ventilators for weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
And when we see relatives come in, we know that only means one thing. That means that they're dying.
Yeah.
And it's horrifically difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also it's very interesting to compare your sort of quite sort of direct in your face experience of that of death versus people who aren't working in hospitals, where it almost becomes, it's just in statistics and people kind of dying in isolation. It's quite sort of dehumanising, actually.
Of course, but the COVID deniers drive me nuts, absolutely nuts.
Yeah, of course, because you're there seeing it. You're seeing the effects. Are we? Yes.
In a sense, the denial can be a way to try to cope with the stress. But I think, it is such a shame that things have gone in that direction, and we can't be on the same page and protect healthcare workers.
Is there part of us as well that is missing just some routines? The stuff that we do, and I don't necessarily mean that stuff that we are conscious of doing, like our daily routines, but also stuff that's sort of unconscious routines and rituals. They're quite good for us, aren't they? And I feel like a lot of those have been stripped away.
That's exactly right. I think what comes up for me there when you say this is particularly social routines.
Yeah.
And of course, those have been taken away from most people. Their normal social routines, just casual interactions with other people. And we know as well, there's a strong body of research that tells us that our social interactions are so important for our well-being and our health and our ability to deal with, other kinds of stress in our lives. So that has been really challenging. And I think one thing that is positive is that we now have the technology that allows us to have social connection despite the social isolation that we need to be in physically. And
the physical element is important, though, isn't it? Like, I definitely, and this is purely anecdotal, I miss physical contact and touch. I just and we thrive on that, don't we? It's good for us.
Yes, me too.
We absolutely do, and I wonder how much that's affecting healthcare workers' ability to do their jobs. Also, the kind of physical separation. But there is evidence suggesting that physical touch actually can promote the release of oxytocin, which is a hormone that can reduce the negative effects of stress on us. So I think that's not imagined. That's real. Touch is important for us physiologically, and we're missing that.
You can't let people come in to see dying relatives because they will get the disease.
Yeah.
There's no way around that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way around that.
And which is why it's so awful. And I think
that's why it's uniquely awful.
Yeah. I wonder if there's something in just when we are going about our daily lives in the way that we are now. Everyone's wearing masks. You are literally trying to avoid going in to people's personal spaces, like you're trying to keep your 2 meters and what have you. And that in itself is a kind of rejection, isn't it? You're sort of like you're rejecting everybody else, like strangers. I'm not talking about your friends, and they are rejecting you. And it occurs to me that's probably not particularly helpful for mental health either.
Yeah,
well, the mental health and the physical health.
What? Say that again, sorry, Tony.
There's mental health and then there's physical health.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I assume that has.
You cannot be depressed if you're dead.
No.
Yeah.
Very true. I'm sort of. I mean, I'm not suggesting that we should be behaving differently. I'm just wondering what might be coming down the line in terms of en masse. Are we going to be psychologically damaged in some ways by this very protracted, very unusual collective experience?
Well, so I think there are a lot of. It's really important there that we think about the different kinds of experiences that people are having. I think that there are some people who are going to come through this and they actually see some benefits in terms of their mental health. People have had the chance to reflect on what's important to them. They may have had a chance to take a step back and think about what they really want out of life, to appreciate their social relationships more. And then on the other hand, we're going to have people who've experienced extreme financial strain, economic problems, loss of careers, and I think that those will have long-term negative consequences. And then there's the kind of stressors that Tony is talking about that we would call traumatic stressors, stress involving threat to life or physical integrity. And we know that stressors involving threat to one's own life and physical integrity, but also just witnessing threat to life or physical integrity, have major effects on the brain and the body and can increase risk for PTSD. I think something, Tony mentioned earlier, you don't have a choice, you just keep going, and that is, one of the ways that humans adapt to stress. We don't process everything in the moment. So when we're under extreme stress, we sort of triage and don't process everything. And for some people, that processing will have to come later. So I think we're going to need to prepare to give people, particularly in healthcare, the resources, the time. When this is over, when people are vaccinated, when we have herd immunity, that people will have that time and resources to process things and recover as best they can.
Because the chances are that people aren't going to be ready just to snap back into normality or what was normality. I'm thinking about, when restrictions were lifted here in the summer. I think I spoke to a lot of people who were still quite sort of anxious about going out and about and being around people. Certainly didn't want to be anywhere near a crowd of people. So that will take time to kind of get that stuff back, won't it?
Yeah, I think that's true. And it won't happen all of a sudden anyway. This is going to be a gradual process as more and more people get vaccinated and we're able to move, slowly expand our world and slowly get back to what will be, in a sense, a new normal, because we'll all be recovering from this.
Do you have, just to finish, Aoife, do you have any tips on healthy patterns of behaviour that we can be trying to adopt whilst we're in the grips of the pandemic?
I do, and it's a little bit boring because it's all of the...
I don't know, it's 11:30, I don't mind boring, it's fine.
All of the things that we should be doing for our physical health anyway. But there's a huge amount of evidence that these are the things that we need to do to protect ourselves from chronic and traumatic stress. And these things are staying physically active, getting aerobic exercise, getting physical activity. That's absolutely critical. And all of the hormones and the immune system processes that are disrupted by stress can actually be regulated during physical activity, so we can return to our baseline. And then we also need to, maintain good diet as much as possible. In the short term, high fat, high sugar foods can dampen the stress response. There's some evidence for that. But in the long term, that's a terrible strategy for maintaining your physical and mental health. So maintaining a healthy diet and kind of resisting that temptation. And then sleep is another big one. This is a tricky one because it doesn't feel like it's totally in our power, and a lot of people are suffering from sleep problems right now. But as much as possible, maintaining good sleep hygiene, keeping a regular routine, and prioritizing your sleep, and certainly trying to avoid that doom scrolling at night. And then another tricky one.
Yeah, definitely avoid the doom scrolling.
At all times, but maybe particularly prioritize sleep. And then finally, I would say, I know it's not the same, but maintaining your social connection as much as you can through technology. So keeping people safe, but trying to stay connected through text and emails and video chats as much as possible.
Okay, so keep active, good diet, prioritise sleep, don't doom scroll, and try and maintain social connections via technology. That's a good summary. It's a good kit of parts. Thanks very much, Aoife. Aoife O'Donovan there, Associate Professor of Biology and Psychiatry at the University of California, San Francisco. Thanks also to Tony, who called in this evening to the show, who's a pharmacist who's very worried about Christmas. He works in ICU in Manchester. It is 11:34. Let's get the news on 5 Live.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live. With the 5 Live News, I'm Shabnam Yunus-Jewell. The author John le Carré, whose novels were bestsellers for 6 decades, has died at the age of 89. He'd been suffering from pneumonia. Le Carré first achieved recognition in 1963 with his third novel, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. He went on to sell 16 million books worldwide. Negotiators from the EU and Britain are continuing to try to break the deadlock over a potential post-Brexit trade deal after the two sides decided to extend talks. Boris Johnson and the President of the EU Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said they had a constructive and useful telephone conversation. However, Mr Johnson has warned the two sides are still far apart on key issues. And Greenwich Council in London has asked all schools in the borough to close and switch to remote learning from Tuesday. In a letter to parents, the council leader, Danny Thorpe, said infection rates in the borough were at their highest since March. Sport now, and Arsenal continued their worst home run in over 60 years, going down 1-0 to Burnley. It's their fourth successive Premier League defeat at the Emirates. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang scored an own goal in the match, and they had Granit Xhaka sent off for grabbing Ashley Westwood's throat. For Burnley, a vital second win of the season, lifting them out of the relegation zone. Their boss Sean Dyche says they knew Arsenal were vulnerable.
Even big players, which have got plenty of them, even them players find it awkward, when things are not quite going well and confidence is not sort of flowing through the club. So we thought there was a bit of that.
Fulham stopped Liverpool from going top of the table, holding them to a 1-1 draw. The visitors were fortunate to equalise from the penalty spot through Mo Salah after an impressive display by Scott Parker's side at Craven Cottage.
Delighted with the performance. All of us, the team and the players, We're probably a little bit disappointed at the same time, because probably felt that 3 points were there for us today. The way we performed, what we showed, we probably deserved to go and win the game. I felt on Chancellor first half.
Tottenham boss Jose Mourinho didn't blame goalkeeper Hugo Lloris for his mistake, which cost them victory at Crystal Palace. He couldn't hold a free kick, which led to Palace's equalising, meaning the game finished 1-1. Spurs stayed top of the league. James Maddison scored twice to help Leicester beat Brighton 3-0 and move up to third. Southampton are in fourth place after beating bottom club Sheffield United 3-0. Scottish Premiership leaders Rangers stretched their unbeaten run to 26 games after beating Dundee United 2-1. Celtic are back up to second after a 2-0 win over Kilmarnock. Casey Stoney's Manchester United extended their lead at the top of the Women's Super League with a 2-1 win over Reading.
And they put us under pressure, and credit to them. I thought they played well today. They pressed us aggressively, they gave us problems, and at times we didn't defend well enough, we didn't do the basics well enough, but the main message this morning was to find a way to win.
Meanwhile, the defending champions Chelsea beat Brighton 1-0. Max Verstappen took victory for Red Bull at the Formula One season-ending Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. It was the Dutchman's second win of the year, ahead of Mercedes' Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton.
It was really enjoyable out there today. We did basically everything right. And I think once you also start up front, you can control the pace a bit more, and it makes your life a bit easier.
Golf's European Tour season also came to an end, with Lee Westwood taking his third race to Dubai title after fellow Englishman Matthew Fitzpatrick won the World Tour Championship. Japan's Hinako Shibuna has a one-shot lead at the US Women's Open in Texas. The final round will conclude tomorrow after a delay because of bad weather. Exeter began their Champions Cup defence in dominant style with a 42-0 win over Glasgow. The Chiefs scored 6 unanswered tries. Here's fullback Stuart Hogg.
We knew it was going to be wet and windy, and I thought we dealt with that really well. We kicked when it was on to kick. We played when our opportunities were there, and we managed to execute with a real clinical edge. So we're chuffed to bits for that.
There were also defeats tonight for Gloucester, Connacht and Harlequins. And in snooker, Mark Selby beat world champion Ronnie O'Sullivan 9 frames to 3 to successfully defend his Scottish Open title. That's the latest from BBC Sport.
BBC Sounds. Hi, Louis Theroux here. I've spent my whole working life trying to find people with interesting stories. It's taken me through high-security jails, to South African hunting grounds, to Las Vegas casinos. But there are still loads of people I've always wanted to talk to, so I've tracked a few of them down for a second series of my podcast, Grounded with Louis Theroux. I'll chat to Sia, Michaela Cole, Rylan, and more. I just became a little bit obsessed with it, peeling back the layers to find out who they really are. Grounded with Louis Theroux. Download the BBC Sounds app to listen.
Across the UK.
This is BBC 5 Live, the Stephen Nolan Show with Rick Edwards.
Evening, I'm with you till 1 a.m. Tonight. Earlier on, we were speaking to Ed Lucas about John le Carré, who has sadly died aged 89. There was something slightly distracting going on during the interview, which was a disconcerting rumbling sound. I couldn't work out what it was. It didn't feel appropriate to ask. Paul in Manchester has texted to say, has he got a duck in a headlock while he's talking to you? That is certainly possible. I thought it was a sleeping dog, a large sleeping dog very close to the phone. The studio manager thinks it may have been as simple as a grumbling stomach. If you've got any ideas, do text us on 85058. What was that peculiar grumbling sound? It's, 11:40. Football's World Players Union, FIFPro, is calling for a change to the regulations covering a team's failure to complete a match. Specifically, it wants to see rules scrapped that punish players who walk off the pitch in protest at racist abuse. As things stand, players aren't allowed to leave the field without the permission of the referee and can face sanctions for doing so if the match has to be abandoned. I spoke to FIFPro General Secretary Jonas Beer-Hoffmann. He's been telling me how he wants the rules to change.
I think, to be honest, these rules, we have to look at them as a package. The reality is what happens in these circumstances, that players effectively protect themselves from a violation of their human rights, the right to have a discrimination-free workplace, because that's what the stadium in the end is.
Yeah.
The notion that anybody would get sanctioned over the action to protect themselves, especially when we've had so many instances over the last years in which the rules that are meant to protect the players have failed, I think is quite absurd. So whatever the rules are today, whatever the rules would be in the future, we would clearly state that a player who in the face of racism or any kind of other discrimination would feel that it is the necessary step to walk off the field should never get sanctioned for that. As a matter of fact, the onus should be on those who are required to provide that safe environment to do so. And if they fail, then the question needs to be rather asked of what needs to be done better on that end.
What kind of level of fine are we talking about as it stands?
To be honest, I'm not quite sure that there's any precedent for that. So it would come down, I think, to a disciplinary procedure, and the fines can be anything from a warning, I guess, to a financial sanction. But as a matter of fact, I don't think there is a case to be had here for any kind of sanction for these players.
No, because presumably any club in one of the situations that you're talking about are not going to discipline their players for, as you say, just protecting themselves in the workplace.
Absolutely. I mean, for the clubs or for the competition organizers, this problem has been going on now for years. Football has certain rules in place with this 3-step protocol and other measures, which unfortunately have repeatedly failed. I think there are some fundamental questions to be asked about these rules, especially when you try to put yourself in the perspective of not somebody who's trying to run a competition, but in the perspective of the players who are actually the victims of this racial abuse. I don't think that it can be continued in a manner in which they effectively would have to endure such a violation of their human rights 3 times before a game is called off. So the whole perspective of how we look at these rules needs to be turned around. And the starting point for that is actually listening to the players who've experienced this, or coaches who've experienced this, or other officials who've experienced this, and build the new regulations from their perspective, not the one of a competition organizer trying to protect the game to go ahead.
We've seen, as you mentioned, England face this kind of dilemma when players have racist abuse. So the game's halted twice, but you had this kind of 3-strike rule. Do you think it's just time to shelve that totally?
I think it definitely needs to be put onto the table and reformed, absolutely. And it's not just the approach of the rule itself. I think we've also seen over years now in various countries that actually, even when the rule is there, it is not properly enforced. We've had so many instances where players actually got awarded yellow cards or similar fines for the sake of pointing out a violation, and the referee did not handle the protocol properly. We've seen that in Italy a few times, in Eastern Europe a few times. Yeah. Which just suggests that the player, who's actually in this case the victim of a racial vilification, must take matters into his or her own hands to protect themselves. And that's just a very bad approach when you're trying to protect somebody from a potentially very traumatizing experience. So the rules need to be put on the table. They need to be reviewed. I think they need to be amended, but it needs to be amended in a manner that comes from how the victims of these allegations actually experience it and what they would like to see. But imagine you go to your workplace tomorrow and you're racially or otherwise discriminated against. This can't be something which you have to endorse 3 times, and where there's even a conversation about sanctioning you if you decided to walk out of your workplace at that point because nobody's properly protecting you. So the perspective needs to change, and it needs to be thought through from those who actually experience the discrimination, and that would get us to probably a very different regulatory framework than we would have today.
And do you think that referees need to be clearer on what they should be doing in these situations?
Well, it's of course, this rule exists all over this continent, and there have been cases in which it has been applied in line with the rules, the way that they're written, but there are many cases in which they don't. What we're seeing is that there is, I think, probably a lack of education around this, a lack of sensitivity, a lack of a common interpretation of how these rules would have to be applied. But the whole notion that the player in this circumstance depends on the referee to protect him has unfortunately failed too often. And if that's the case, then the rules need to be reviewed, and that includes, of course, the role of the referee in these kinds of circumstances. Because what we saw now with these walk-offs is that the players effectively didn't trust these rules to protect them any longer, and therefore they took matters into their own hands, which is I mean, it's fantastic that they had the courage and the solidarity to do so, but it should not be on them to have to do this.
Presumably, though, you are encouraged by, thinking about the Paris Saint-Germain, Istanbul, Başakşehir game, that they walked off. You doubt there will be any sanctions against the players or the teams, and this should be setting a good precedent to then, well, A, we're having this conversation, and B, to see changes rolled out.
Well, we certainly hope so. I mean, we have to be honest, as everybody in football, that we don't have this problem under control. Far from it. The prevalence of these instances, from what I'm seeing, is much higher in our sport than probably in any other. And that has various reasons, of course, the size of our sport and the social context of the sport and all that. But as a matter of fact, we failed to protect these players from these instances. And when we've talked to players over the last years, there's an enormous frustration with that. There's an enormous will to drive change with whatever is required to do so. But it also again and again comes out that the rules aren't fit for purpose, but maybe just as importantly, that the representation of people with these experiences in the decision-making processes of our sport is insufficient. How can people who don't experience discrimination decide on rules that are meant to protect others from discrimination without listening to those who've actually gone through it?
Are you hearing more and more from your members about this, sort of directly raising it with you and your union?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it's them raising it and us probably having more processes in place to have this conversation, because of course solving this requires everybody in football. That also includes us. We have to do more and we have to do better as well. But the conversations are very clear that this is something that the players will not accept any longer. And I think in some ways we've had earlier this year with the on-field protests, we've broken a certain understanding of what players are supposedly allowed and not allowed. And I think we've broken another barrier now where players have effectively stopped the game and have taken it into their own hands to determine under what circumstances they're willing to play. And I don't think we'll ever be able to go back from that, and that's a good thing. But of course, it's a hard way of arriving at this, but this must lead to change now, there's no question.
That was FIFPro General Secretary Jonas Behr Hoffmann speaking to me earlier. It is 11:48, listening to 5 Live, with me, Rick Edwards, in for Stephen Nolan, with you till 1 a.m. This time of year would normally see pubs and restaurants absolutely rammed with office parties, tables heaving with highly flammable jumpers, agonising small talk with the boss. Obviously not this year though, but rather than skip them altogether, a lot of office parties have simply moved online. But how do you host a good Zoom Christmas party? Is there even such a thing? Is it worth trying? George Whitefield runs Sharky and George, who are a big party planning business, whose parties are now pretty much all online. And I spoke to him earlier and asked him if he'd normally be extremely busy at this point in December.
Yes, absolutely rammed, running around. Probably doing more children's Christmas parties, a few adult ones, but this year's completely flipped on its head, and we are back-to-back, sort of 5:30, 6 in the morning, through till midnight, doing corporate adult Christmas parties on Zoom.
Hold on, who's doing Christmas parties in the morning, or are you international?
Yeah, international, because there are no borders now. You can do it anyway. So yeah, tomorrow morning I'm up at 5:30 in India, doing a party for a hedge fund. And then game shows in Arizona at night time.
So go on, so without spoiling the surprise too much, and hopefully no one in India who works for that hedge fund is listening, what's the format going to be?
It's a team of about 40 of them, and we're going to split them into groups of about 10 in each team. And then using Zoom, using the breakout rooms, each team are going to do a little sort of roughly 10-15 minute challenge, and they've got to try and complete it in the fastest time possible, and then we circulate them round. So one of them might be like a mini escape room, so there's a challenge where they've got to crack open a combination lock briefcase and solve a load of puzzles as quick as they can. And the next one might be more of a, you know, that memory game where you have to look at a tray and memorize all the things?
Yes.
A version of that that's a bit more like the Generation game. So we pass a load of things past the camera, and then they've got to run around the houses, gather them all, and try and get as many as they can remember in the time.
Have you jury rigged like a little conveyor belt in your office?
Sort of. It's more actually passing it with our hands, just past the camera each time.
Okay, but I'm starting to feel like I might quite enjoy this.
It's a lot of fun. I mean, it's pretty nuts. We're all sort of changing costume, changing outfits every second. You know, 1 minute you're a game show host in a cheesy velvet jacket and sort of weird glasses, and then the next minute you're
nothing wrong with being a game show host. By the way, George,
we're going for the quality 80s look. You know, with the roll neck, the gold neck, it's a great look. And then then suddenly you're the head of MI5. Trying to, you know, in a suit and slick back hair and stuff. But it's quite fun.
Yes, I mean, you're making it sound like you're having a great time, George.
Yeah, I mean, it's mildly stressful getting the tech right, because obviously everyone's new to it all, and with the updates, it changes the whole time. But once you got that sorted, it's really fun. Yeah, it's great. It's very engaging.
I had sort of assumed that people would just sack off Christmas parties this year, and that people would kind of have a bit of, you know, online Zoom fatigue. But it sounds like that's not the case. It sounds like you're busy.
I think, we're actually flat out. I think for some people, I totally get it. You know, they've been on Zoom all day. They probably don't want to necessarily socialise on it as well. But I think a lot of companies, you know, have been doing their Friday afternoon drinks on Zoom, and they've probably dried up a bit as far as the energy goes. But if you suddenly bring someone in to actually do something fun, and most people are pretty sceptical and come into it with a pretty low expectation, and it really works. You can do some really fun stuff.
That's great news. Great news for you, George, because if they've got a really low bar,
exactly.
You should be able to exceed it.
With a bit of luck, just do something and they'll have a laugh. But I think actually, to me, one of the things is that other companies are trying to make it really slick and smart, and our approach is much more just have a laugh. And you know, if we're having a laugh doing it and everyone else getting involved is having fun, then then it's going to work. But if you're too stressed about making it really slick, it probably comes across as a bit dry.
Were you worried that you just weren't going to have any business at this time of year?
Yeah. I didn't think we were going to be doing anything. I thought we'd be having our most relaxed December ever. But it turns out it's quite the opposite, because we're doing a load of stuff we've never done before. I mean, in brutal honesty, early November we put together a brochure of, 10 or 12 sort of corporate Christmas party ideas, sent them out to all of our clients and loads we've never met before, and thought, let's see what happens. And then suddenly early December it's like, oh my God, we've got to do all this stuff and we haven't written it, and we've got no idea how it's going to work. But it then did, and they work, and they're brilliant, and they're really fun.
How many people work at Sharky and George?
So full time, we've got 15 of us, and then there are about 200 guys and girls who are actors, teachers, tree surgeons, generally sort of fun people.
And do you have any tips for people who are thinking about hosting their own parties? You know, I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of people trying to do online stuff for Christmas with their families.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think it's really, really good for everybody to have the same physical thing in front of them. I think there are some naff terms of it being a sort of hybrid event, where it's part real life, part virtual. So, you know, if you're going to do cocktail making, either sending all the ingredients out to everybody is quite fun, or just give everyone a shopping list and say, make sure you've all got this stuff in front of you. And then doing stuff together on Zoom is really fun, and it works really well. Getting the hang of sharing music on Zoom is pretty important, because, you know, you can pipe the sound of your computer through to everyone else's, and that's great. And keeping it short, any more than an hour I think you're pushing it.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. It's weirdly tiring.
It's exhausting. You've really got to concentrate,
yeah,
and everyone talks over the top of each other.
We've got our, I think, our work Christmas Zoom on Thursday. And I think it's safe to say quite a lot of people are dreading it.
What are you doing? You know?
Well, we're open to suggestions. Anything. So it's a load of, JD's radio guys. What would you do for us?
My top two that we do at the moment are a race night. So basically, splitting everyone into little betting syndicates, and you say, right, everyone's got to pretend 100 quid or whatever as a group to start with, and then we've chosen a few really random races, the actual YouTube videos of races that we film the game, the car rides, the form of all the horses and that sort of stuff. People put their bets on, have a sort of bookie character, and then we watch the race. People go into the breakout rooms to decide. But then I filmed the snail race last week. My God.
Get the slugs going, that sort of thing, yeah.
We did that, and then we've done a space hopper race, all of our office team, so you can bet on which one of us is going to win it. And then we've got a whole load of little Shetland ponies and race them across a field, running into a bucket of food. It's pretty highbrow stuff, but it's quite fun. That, and then we've done a murder mystery one, which I love.